Palestinian narrative and really brought it into academia at large. One of the interesting aspects of specifically academia in North America, but in diaspora at large, when you look at the attractiveness of the Arab-Israeli conflict, I'd point to two significant time periods that really have generated much of the sympathy that really relates to this. One is 1967, which really was seen when it comes to North America as was a miracle, not in the sense also on the Israeli side that the victory took place, but also was a phenomenon from the eyes of the Arab world that this actually took place and actually happened, which engendered a lot of monetary compensation to actually figure out the study of why and how Israel was able to overcome, and really that the turning point really changed the narrative of the victim, and really that this small country is able to defeat in this short amount of time. That engendered a lot amount of monies that were devoted to start figuring out the phenomenon of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The other aspect really, it was also a development at the same time in tandem, was the evolution of what is considered to be peace studies or conflict and resolution studies that led to the phenomenon of trying to figure out what is going to lead to what we consider to be some kind of equilibrium when you're trying to understand the victim and the victimizer. But part of the challenge of peace studies and conflict and resolution is that they provided kind of an outlet to deal with the conflict without going through the conventional statecraft mentality of trying to have a win-win situation or a win-lose situation, because peace and conflict resolution is the assumption that there is some kind of equality and equilibrium that forces the people to recognize each other's victimhood in order to resolve a problem. That led, as I'll point out, something I was involved in the 90s, obviously the Oslo Peace Accords, was based on the idea of, was known and is known in peace studies as CBMs, confident building measures. The idea that if you could get the two parties together, there would be an acknowledgement of a farewell to arms, the idea that we're all guilty in the same way, and that would also lead to a resolution. This mentality was also engendered in Northern Ireland and Algeria, and for all those who really deal with the concept of peace and conflict resolution, everybody tries to position the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic per se within that paradigm of acknowledging each other's right to exist and redefining the stereotypical narrative and trying to figure out, that we're all victims, that we can move on beyond that once we acknowledge each other's problems or shortcomings. The problem with peace studies and conflict resolution at large is that it goes around the actual problem and really doesn't really take into consideration the challenges and the shortcomings and the lying that frankly thankfully exists in many of the situations by projecting that image of the victim. The other point that needs to be understood, I think, when you're talking about at large Palestinianization of academia or the influence, and this ties into Richard's comments about the influence of Edward Said, one can't look at large with this whole area studies and the influence of individuals like Said without mentioning the significance of his work Orientalism and how it really defined and redefined the perception of Palestinians in academia at large. Said himself was not a Middle East specialist or an historian. He basically used his work, literary work, to cascade this image. The whole concept and the main thrust of the idea of Orientalism was that basically if you are not from the Orient, you don't understand the Orient, thus you cannot teach the Orient. Ergo, the entire body of Middle East studies of North America is composed of predominantly Arabs. And so when you look at how Middle East studies at large, and really as a result of that, at times even affected Israel studies, how they are being taught, there has been a criticism that Israel studies is a different dynamic altogether, but we who understand the Arab mindset can only teach the Arab mindset, and Jews are different in that perspective, also trying to highlight the sympathy for the Palestinian cause. So when you look at, for example, Middle East studies of North America, that the entire groupthink mentality is affected by Edward Said and his Orientalism school of thought. He's become an honorary member over the years, and that was really a testament to how much one work. I mean, I would say if you search around, if you do a Google search around, there is no other book that is assigned to this topic like Said's book, even in disciplines that have nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, and how much it's been really engendered within academia in order to perpetuate that idea of victimhood. One of the famous quotes that Said has manipulated and has made his own is the famous quote that is quoted ongoing in the Zionist narrative of the fact that a land without a people for a people without a land. Said took that same quote and said it's really a land without a people, and basically to argue from there that basically the early Zionists denied there was any Arab presence in the pre-mandatory Palestine prior to their coming, in order to, again, to deny that Jews basically eradicated Arabs, perpetuating the Nakba narrative. This was part of the ongoing perpetual narrative, how we saw that Zionism is colonialism, it's racism by nature, and it has this kind of ongoing process to basically deny any kind of Arab existence. Said's acolytes follow this narrative we see in academia today. If you fast forward to the environment of the kind of comments that you hear in North America, for example, individuals like Khatam Bazayan, who is was out here in California, would make public statements like the fact that we need to have another intifada in America. Again, the fact that intifada is really the terminology relates to the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. The fact that one needs to struggle. Arafat in his day defined the term intifada as the movement that a dog makes when he has a tick in his body, kind of the uproar, struggle to get against, to stand up for those kind of comments. Those are the kind of comments that are coming out of American academicians who are part of the Middle East Studies cohort. Even Jewish individuals who have adopted the Palestinian narrative, individuals like Joel Bainin, for example, would make these kind of inaccurate comments about the environment of the Middle East that have nothing to do with reality. A famous comment that he made was that he mocked the study of terrorism, calling it, those terrorologists at his presidential address at the Middle East Studies of North America's annual meeting right after 9/11. The fact that terrorism has no room in academia, and the fact that it was invented by Israelis or by neoconservatives within academia to try to create this warmonger mentality in order to cascade that throughout the system. Bainin also made a comment that there was that Israel faced no existential threat in 1967. Again, we know that that's obviously not true, but those are the kind of sentiments and really attitudes that have been pervasive in academia in order to perpetuate the Palestinian victimizer, and really the concept of trying to engender this sense in order to create sympathy. The other interesting part, of course, which is also worth noting, of course, and I said that in my earlier remarks, is of course the fact that money has also been a huge factor in why we need to study and why we need to look at this phenomenon at large. Ophira Seligtar, who is an academic and wrote a great deal about academia, wrote a book about the Oslo Peace Accords, and she wrote in a very cynical way that if one wanted to make money in the 90s, all one had to do was to invent peace studies, and that would generate loads of money that would come in order to create studying this phenomenon. And again, this is all part of the Oslo Peace Accord that generated money not only into the creation of a peace process, but also into study why there needs to be peace, even though the Palestinians never followed through on any of the commitments. But this is all part of that larger narrative. The other interesting aspect, which is of course one of the other elements that relate to NGOs and the image of the poor Palestinian victim and how that has been portrayed in academia and other outlets at large through NGOs and other groups at large, is really what I think is the biggest cognitive dissonance that exists. It has to do with the refugee problem. The idea that Palestinian refugees are the inherent victim, they are the symbol of Palestinian identity, and there has been a creation of an entire agency within the United Nations devoted to perpetuating that same image. When we talk about trying to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's, every time one talks about and mentions these issues, there is always mentioning of trying to resolve the refugee issue, trying to solve the right of return. What is never mentioned and what I think is critical to this debate is the fact that if one gives up the right of return from the Palestinian perspective, one gives up one's own identity. So one would question the fact, why would ever Palestinians even give up the idea of a right of return? So when we talk about the numbers today, the original numbers that we talk about, of the original 48, 49 would amount to maybe to be about 30,000 individuals today. But the fact of the matter is that Palestinians are the only refugee population in the world where one can inherit a status of refugees, and not only by virtue of one's father, but also by one's mother, and that's why you have today between 5 to 7 million refugees worldwide, according to UNRWA's account, which is the UN agency devoted to Palestinian refugees. That again is another mechanism of creating and engendering the sympathy of the Palestinian victim, the fact that one can be a refugee forever. And that has allowed everybody to look at the situation that Israel is really the main obstacle for trying to resolve peace, because there are still Palestinian refugees. Nobody actually goes to actually look at the heart of the problem, why they still continue to exist. If you compare, for example, UNRWA to the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, according to their definition, one can only be a refugee for one generation. It's only with the Palestinians that you could be a refugee forever. And that is the reason why the Arab leaders over the years, from Nasser all the way to bin Laden, would make these public statements saying, we are all Palestinian refugees. The idea that the Palestinians themselves have been used as a media tool to engender this kind of sympathetic support at large. So when you look at this entire background that creates this cognitive dissonance, and you look at the historical narrative, when you try to parachute this within conflict resolution and peace studies, this really allows Palestinians to get around it without really trying to solve the problem, because there is an assumption made that everybody is a victim and we don't need to acknowledge any kind of falsehood. But what it also allows is the perpetuation of the problem at large. And so this is what has allowed this entire narrative to be cascaded throughout academia at large. So these are really the main critical points that allow the Palestinian narrative to be seen as the number one issue within academia. Furthermore, if you look around the campus environment, if you look at the impact of Said himself on the disciplines within academia at large, there is an immediate attachment, sympathetically and beyond that for the victim, and really shows why any group adopts the Palestinian narrative, from peace and conflict to gender studies and to other groups who are all looking to solve and to attach themselves to a victim, and they've basically adopted the Palestinian narrative as that ultimate poster child of why we need to support this cause. And that's part of the main reason I would argue that when you look at large at Middle East studies in North America, specifically, the European scene is somewhat different, is you have a pervasive image of the Palestinian victim that has engendered a great deal of support and moreover a great deal of monies. Monies that have come in not only from North American academia, but also outside Arab money from the Saudis, for example, that have been trickling into academia since the 1960s, into different institutions, saying that, we want you to study the Arab world, but you can only study the Arab world when you have an Arab professor, ergo you would get the very distinct narrative of how we are perceived, and this is what allows this to perpetuate. Bottom line is, regardless of one's views about the conflict, the biggest fallacy I would argue within peace studies and within conflict resolution is that they actually do not promote peace. They're actually working against it. And that actually works against us as far as to resolve anything regarding the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic if one is seriously concerned about solving it rather than perpetuating the victimhood narrative. So, thank you very much.